Of course, the federal government will have the final say on the water cuts. I spoke to the federal Environment Minister Tony Bourke from Hobart a short time ago. Tony Bourke, thanks for being there.
No, pleasure.
Since Craig Knowles took over running the MurrayDarling Basin Authority, Green groups say they're being shut out of negotiations. Has the MurrayDarling Authority bowed to pressure from irrigators?
Not at all. The MurrayDarling Basin Authority, from what I've seen, has been more consultative than ever before. Obviously, as you get to the lead up to the draft coming out, you get different interests across the basin doing different, a little bit of positioning in terms of what their ideal version of a draft plan would look like. The bottom line that I wanted when Craig Knowles was appointed was to have a body that engaged, was truly consultative and was willing to give people a hearing while they were putting their information together in a transparent way. All the evidence I've seen is that's exactly what they've been doing.
Environmentalists say that 4,000 gigalitres is the minimum amount that needs to be returned to the rivers, yet 2,800 gigalitres is the figure that's being discussed right now. Are you willing to compromise on that?
I think the minimum that we need is a basin plan that delivers a healthy working basin.
And is 4,000 gigalitres the figure that will deliver that?
Oh, I'm not going to pretend to be the person who's in charge of the scientific analysis of all of this. There's a whole lot of science that and scientific work that's been peer-reviewed, that's held by the MurrayDarling Basin Authority, that forms the foundations of the decisions they'll make.
So, Tony Bourke, there's a lot of water in the Murray-Darling River at this point. Under those conditions, is it difficult to justify to farmers cutting their water allocations?
One of the things with having a lot of water in the system at the moment, it's actually the easiest time for communities to make a transition. It's the hardest time probably to garner some of the political will throughout the community because the problem's obvious when the system's dry. The truth is, though, we're not talking about simply trying to solve a problem when the system's dry. We're trying to solve a problem on an ongoing basis.
The Victorian Water Minister says he has serious concerns about the economic impact on towns that rely on irrigation. Do you share those concerns?
I think everybody wants to make sure that we deliver the reform in a way that helps communities with any adjustment. The Victorian Water Minister's been talking to me a lot about trying to find ways of unlocking some of the infrastructure funds which have been held up for a long time, and he wants to find ways of being able to do that because, quite rightly, Peter Walsh sees the infrastructure funds as a really effective way of making sure we can help communities through this. And we've both made public statements that we want the negotiations between our governments resolved before the draft plan comes out so that infrastructure money can start getting out the door.
On another issue regarding your relationship with the Victorian Government, the Coalition seems determined to reintroduce cattle into the Alpine National Park. Can you stop them, and will you try to take control of all national parks?
It's extraordinary that national parks are now part of partisan political debate. They never used to be. There used to be a really simple rule with national parks. There might be controversy when they were being established, but once they were in, there was a view that there'd be no backward steps. Reintroducing cattle grazing into the Alpine National Park is a clear backward step.
What will you actually do to stop it happening if you feel so strongly about it?
I've sent letters out to my state counterparts at the moment that the thing I'm contemplating, and I want to get their feedback on it before I go any further, is to actually list those national parks, which is most of them that are caught by the international conventions, as matters of national environmental significance in their own right. What
will writing letters actually achieve?
Oh, I'm not writing seeking permission, I'm writing for consultation. If there's an argument that they're able to put forward that I hadn't thought about, that I want to weigh up, then the consultation's real. But I've made no secret of the starting point of my view on these issues. A national park is not a farm. Every other farmer in the nation pays for their own cattle grazing. There's a handful of families in one marginal seat in Victoria who the Victorian Government wants to grant free adjustment. I don't believe that's an appropriate use of a national park. Whether or not being able to prevent it lies within federal powers or not is something that will depend on the individual application, on the individual action. But I am interested in extending the extent to which national parks can be viewed as being of national importance.
You're talking about consultation and a process that doesn't seem that it will happen very quickly. How long would it take, theoretically, for the federal government to actually take control of these national parks?
Well, when you say take control, all I'm talking about is being able to automatically have it considered of national importance if anyone wants to mine a national park, if anyone wants to have grazing in a national park or logging in a national park. Pre-existing behaviour, anything that's already happening and's been going on for years, doesn't get caught by this. But whenever someone wants to take a clear backward step in these ways, then it would fall to me. The letters that I've sent out, that went out yesterday, have asked the state ministers to get back to me within 28 days. And once I've received their correspondence back on that, I'll be able to take into account their views and make a decision.
But spring is just a few months away. Theoretically, could the Victorian Government reintroduce the cattle, that's the timeframe they're planning on, before you have the ability to actually do anything about it?
Well, last time they introduced the cattle without referring the matter to me. After that, they wrote to me, the Environment Minister wrote to me and said before they introduce cattle again, they would actually formally apply under the national environmental law and seek the appropriate approvals. They haven't sought anything like that from me yet, so I can only work on the basis that they're not about to introduce cattle into the national park.
Has this issue totally soured your relationship with the Victorian Government?
Oh, it wasn't a great start, I'll tell you that. It surprised me that they just decided to act unilaterally the way they did. It surprised me more when they claimed it was a scientific study. It surprised me even more when the scientist who was meant to be in charge of the study seemed to find out about it after the cattle had been introduced. So it's been a turnstile of errors that we've seen in the way the Victorian Government's handled it. I'll agree it hasn't been a great start, and I was surprised that they chose to handle it that way.
Tony Bourke, thanks very much for your time.
Always a pleasure.
And for the record, we did ask to speak to Victorian Environment Minister Ryan Smith and the Premier Ted Baillieu, but they were both unavailable. And we also asked to speak to Tourism Minister Louise Asher today about the cost of the Grand Prix. She also declined our invitation.